the Middle podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck. So, was that yesterday? It seems like a million years ago. So, I am one day out from surgery that I have been fretting about for, weeks now. But it's done, it's over with, and yeah, I could have given myself an out and not recorded tonight, but I think part of it is that I know that I'm going to have to be back at work in just a couple of days, and I needed to get right back to it. One of the things that I always try to keep in mind whenever something is going on is trying to push through, and I don't mean overdo it to the point where we hurt ourselves mentally or physically, but just trying to keep momentum going despite any challenges that we have in our lives. And gotta tell you, it could be hard. I am in a fair amount of pain, not terrible, but enough. And yeah, it sucks because it's also the kind of surgery where I can't really be given any kind of hardcore pain medication, to be perfectly honest, in part because of what that can do to the body, particularly along the digestive tract, which when you have a surgery that's Crohn's related, you have to be cautious of. So, yeah, it's just like alternating Tylenol and ibuprofen, and it kind of does the trick, but not really. So I apologize in advance if I am less articulate than my normal rambling self, if that's such a thing. But also, if I sound, slurred at all, it's probably because I'm not enunciating particularly well. But one of the things that I guess is a good thing is that it's over and it's done with. Now I'm in the recovery phase, and then it becomes a matter of determining what the next courses of action, if any, are to be taken. So this was step one, and it sucks, and it's going to be a few months of trial and error and trying to figure out where we go from here. It's going to be a lot of discomfort, and I guess we have to be comfortable in our discomfort sometime and just say, this is my current state of being, and I recognize how much worse it could be. Particularly with Crohn's disease, there are some people who have had to lose much more significant parts. I had a bowel resection done more than 20 years ago now at this point, and and I haven't had to have any surgery like that since. And there are some people who obviously, and I'm sure you've heard about this, have had to have, complete colostomies, So I'm very, very fortunate. And I try to keep that in mind, that for every kind of condition, there are always stages and levels to all this. And mine is worse than some, better than many, and that's okay. And we get through it. So I've decided to increase the challenge for myself this week as far as topics go, which is probably pretty odd timing, but I needed to get back onto a track of trying to be researched and informed on my topics more than I probably have been lately. And I think part of that has been having things on my mind, particularly the surgery, my daughter, just family life, etc. And, the podcast has really stagnated in the past few weeks. And some of you have given me great positive feedback, and I appreciate you. You're the people who come back week after week. So I don't know, maybe there'll be some new listeners this week based upon the topic, but we shall see, because some of you may feel the way that I have about this particular topic. And obviously you've clicked the button, so you know what the topic is. So I guess we should kind of just get into it. So this week's topic is the band, The Police. Now, The Police have been apart far longer than they were ever together. But one of the things that I enjoy, and I haven't done it as much, and you'll see behind me if I ever post the video, but right behind me is a drum kit. There's a acoustic bass hanging on the wall. I have numerous instruments here in the room where I record. This is our studio. And I am capable of getting some kind of noise out of just about every instrument. It doesn't mean that I'm particularly good at any of them. I'm not, because I have never really put in the hard work to really develop. I did for a few years back in the mid to late 90s. I was playing guitar regularly, writing music regularly. And, it was one of those things. I was very fragile, I think, from an ego perspective of where I was in my development, and thought I was really making progress and writing some really good songs on my own. And it never really got any traction with my family, friends, etc., to ever go, hey, that's really good, or hey, that's a great idea. We can germinate that into something bigger. And I think I became somewhat discouraged by what I was able to do. So I haven't really continued to do much with music. I'll go through phases where I'll pick up the guitar, play it nightly, and then I'll go dormant. And anyone who knows guitar, you then start from almost square one every single time. You have to be playing consistently, and you have to be playing something like, forget what the number is, like 50,000 hours, 100,000 hours, I don't know, some crazy number that you have to put in before you could be considered proficient in anything. So anyway, what am I rambling about the subject, about all this? So I like to watch music-related videos. And one of them in particular is a series, it's a channel called Drumeo on YouTube. And one of the things that always inevitably comes up, it's seemingly every episode, any of the drummers that will on there will name some of their favorites. And one of the guys who's on many of the lists is Stewart Copeland, who is, of course, the drummer for The Police. And I'd seen a bunch of people doing like versions of, Police songs, because they'll get to choose stuff that they like to do. Hey, I'm going to play this Police tune. There's also a drummer on YouTube by the name of El Estepario, he is like a human drum machine. He can play with one hand what many artists can't play with two. And he had done a video saying that the challenge of there's no such thing as a perfect drummer. And he said, and I see you, Stewart Copeland, as being a perfect drummer. So it's one of those things where I started kind of watching Stewart Copeland related stuff. And the thing is, I never really got into The Police. So I don't know if it's my age, right? So I am a mid-Xer, right? And if I talk to people just a little bit older than me, they will tell you like The Police were like their band. I had a boss at one of my workplaces that was just a couple years older, but it was enough where that was her early teens when they were wrapping up. So think about this. They wrapped up in 1983. 1983. I was 9 years old in 1983, and they were already calling it a career. So they were not that soundtrack of my teen years, which I think is always such a critical part of our formation. Yes, there's things that we really enjoyed when we were younger. Certainly, someone like Michael Jackson was hugely influential on people in their even preteen years. And thinking about the fact that he'd already been in the business with the Jackson 5, et cetera, for decades at that point. There were a few. A lot of it for me was pop music in my younger years until I started making that transition into rock and roll. So they were just a little bit before me as being, I want to buy every single record and dig into their discography. I didn't, and I think part of it, and we'll get into it, is what kind of music they played. But yeah, a lot of people, if they were in their teens when The Police were around, like that was the thing. And I think about other bands of the era, across all different genres, this whole concept of new wave and what does it mean? So you have your Talking Heads, you had, the Clash, you had the Cars over here stateside. Like there were all these groups that were coming out. I always latched on more to a group like the Cars, even when I was younger. But there's a reason for that, and I think that will become evident as we go through the Police's music and the actual type of music that they played. And what exactly did they play? That's a whole different thing. So bear in mind, so the Police, Stewart Copeland, Andy Summers, and of course, Sting. There's the whole Sting piece. So again, they break up when, 1983, I'm 9 years old. I have then all of Sting's solo work as being a part of the pop music zeitgeist. And frankly, I kind of found his music boring, and I found him to be perhaps a little bit pretentious. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong about that, and as we'll go through, I'll talk about that. But I never really dug in, not to his solo work, and I didn't go back retroactively and look deeper into the Cars. I just knew basically the hits, and there were plenty of hits. But yeah, I've been now consuming more of their work in just like the past few weeks and even in the last few days than I have in like 40 plus years. It's been interesting. But I do recall something. And, you know, they hit my radar for a little while in, I want to say the early 2000s. And this is before they did the reunion tour. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But my father-in-law was an avid PBS concert viewer. He loved those concerts, my late father-in-law. And I remember visiting in Omaha, and he's like, oh, I'm going to watch the Sting concert. Because he went and bought it on DVD. He loved it so much. And I'm like, Sting, whatever. And I start watching, and I find myself being really impressed with the musicality, his skill as both a bass player and a singer. His band was tight. Dominic Miller on guitar. I think it's Dominic Miller. Anyway, excellent band. And I found myself really enjoying it. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll do a little bit, you know, dig into that a little bit. And this is early iTunes. So you could go ahead and get music, you know, a buck a song or something like that back then. But I still, like, his solo work just didn't do it for me. Couple songs here and there. But other than that, it was like, no. And then he was in advertisements all the time. So anyway, let's jump in. Who are the Police? Who are the Police? So I mentioned Stewart Copeland. So he is the drummer, but also the founder of the band. So Stewart Copeland in 1977 had broken up a band called Curved Air, which he'd already had a couple of records in the bag. And what's interesting is that he was the only one of the band who'd had numerous recordings and some early, not necessarily massive chart success, but was somewhat established in the music industry. And he was the youngest of the band. So he invited a gentleman who is the lead singer and bass player for a band called Last Exit, Gordon Sumner, that we all have come to know and love, or not love, as Sting, just to come and jam. And they came and they jammed, and they found they had a little bit of chemistry right out of the gate. And they brought in a guitarist by the name of Henry Padavani as the original guitar player for the trio that was the Police. So they're like, maybe this isn't enough. And they ended up finding a guy who was 10 years older than them, by the name of Andy Summers, who had been well known as a musician in England. And they brought him in, and they tried to make it a go as a four-piece. But they found that, like, Henry just wasn't dynamic enough, didn't have the chops that they were really looking for, or the originality or the ability to go in the different directions that they were kind of visualizing in their work. So he was let go, although Sting and Copeland, I guess, they labored over this because they felt like they had started this band and they were loyal to this Padavani guy. But ultimately, he was let go, and Andy Summers, Stewart Copeland, and Sting became the core group of the Police. So now they are established, they're a power trio, and what's interesting is all of them were basically rooted as jazz players. But that wasn't what was happening in the music scene in London at the time. If anything, it was about as far away from jazz as you can get, because punk and ska were really the things that were starting to take off in that scene. So they decided they were going to, we're going to jump into the punk scene. So a lot of people have kind of, I guess, considered them posers a little bit, or interlopers into the scene where they didn't really belong, but they did jump right in. But what they were doing was definitely a unique take on it, because all of them were rather skilled musicians. Now, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, huge punk rock fan. I don't think that musical talent and punk are really always these mutually exclusive things. I think there are some excellent punk musicians, always have been. It's just that the formation of the songs tend to be oftentimes very different and can be less complex. Certainly some of the post-punk, post-hardcore bands were taking elements of progressive music along with punk, which that in of itself should be kind of a dichotomy. But this is where they kind of came through. So it was like punk with this jazz basis, but also filtered through reggae and bossa nova and waltzes and punk. They ended up doing a tour. It was The Damned, The Clash, and The Police. So they clearly had garnered some credibility in the punk scene, although, again, people would be like, they're a little bit interlopers. They're not as punk as they should be. But hey, it is what it is. But that jazziness always came through. It really did. And I think that's, for me, why they didn't jump out at me in the same way, because I think, particularly when you're younger and you're thinking about either punk or rock or metal, you're very much stuck into, at least I was, 4/4, power chords, like that kind of mentality just kind of jumped off, the speaker, right? I could really latch onto that. It was something that I could clearly understand, the simplicity of it. And maybe I just didn't get the sophistication of what was happening musically. Same thing with a group like Steely Dan. I don't know. I never really got into it. That jazziness never really got to me, although I've become much more an appreciator of Steely Dan as well in latter years. But yeah, I wanted that 4/4, that 3/4, 3 or 4 chords, 4 on the floor, boom, AC/DC. There you go. Like, that's it. But they had this kind of pretentiousness, I think, inherent in them. And I'm not saying that this is something that they tried to affect. I really don't. I think they were just doing things that they enjoyed. But I remember a friend of mine. So I'd said, you got to give them credit. This is 20 plus years ago I had this conversation. You got to give him credit for what they brought to the music. And his response was, do I? Now, he is a musician, professional musician, and he just hated the Police and Sting in particular with like a passion. And I think part of it is that he kind of also had this idea that they were not as pure. And again, he was coming out of hardcore punk scene, that they weren't the real deal. They're fake reggaeists. They're fake punk rock, and they don't really have integrity, I guess is how you could put it. Such an old mindset. And certainly when you're younger, 20 years ago, different story. I'm a different person than I was 20, 30 years ago in terms of, street credibility, but I do understand the sentiment. But anyway, let's jump into their records. So they came out of the gate in 1978 with Outlandos d'Amour. This was an album that went platinum pretty much everywhere in all of the major markets that you would think of for music. So UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, US, Netherlands. So that was the first record, came out usually in like the Anglo countries, if you will. Their highest chart position here in the States was 23, but let's take a look at the songs on here. So by the way, Outlandos d'Amour, Outlaws of Love. And the chart position is kind of impressive when you think about a band coming out. So here are the tracks from Outlandos d'Amour. Next to You, So Lonely, the massive hit Roxanne, Holding My Life, Peanuts, Can't Stand Losing You, also a major hit, Truth Hits Everybody, Born in the 50s, Be My Girl, Sally, and Masako Tonga. But those first few, let's see. Let's take a look at the singles and their chart position. So, the only one that made it, and this is so interesting to me, to any charts was Can't Stand Losing You and coming in at the UK at number 42, and So Lonely did 26 in the Netherlands. But what they did was a reissue once the band started getting some traction. So Roxanne and Can't Stand Losing You were both reissued in 1979. Ultimately, this time Roxanne landed at 32 on the US charts, made it as high as 8 in New Zealand, and then Can't Stand Losing You reissue went to number 2 on the UK charts. Did not chart here in the States. I do remember hearing it on the radio, but that is how they first got started. So they came out of the gate with literally a classic song. Mind you, a classic song that is about a stalker. It is not a love song. Roxanne is not, well, actually, I'm sorry. Roxanne is the whore song. Sorry, the sex worker song, not the stalker song. That came later. I apologize. Roxanne, You Don't Have to Turn on the Red Light. So yeah, it was a song about a red light district woman named Roxanne, And it is really considered to be one of the greatest songs of all time. In fact, it was number 388 in Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time, and is 85 by VH1 on the list of the 100 greatest rock songs. The song itself was inducted into the Grammys Hall of Fame. So, 1978 and 79, they came out of the gate doing pretty well for themselves. Their follow-up came a little less than a year later. So, Outlandish d'Amour was released on November 17th, 1978. Their follow-up, Regatta de Blanc, came out October 2nd, 1979. And again, platinum pretty much across the board, although did not reach as high here in the States as Outlandish d'Amour. It actually came in at number 25. However, it did go number 1 in their native UK. So Regatta de Blanc, released 1979 by A&M Records. It was ranked at number 369 in Rolling Stone's magazine's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. So check out this track listing. Message in a Bottle, Regatta de Blanc, It's All Right for You, Bring on the Night, Death Wish, Walking on the Moon, On Any Day, The Bed's Too Big Without You, Contact, Does Everyone Stare, and No Time This Time. And I believe that this record had the most Stewart Copeland contributions with 6 either single or co-credit as a writer. Really interesting. But let's take a look at the singles. Let's see. Message in the Bottle. Really, that only went to number 74 in the States. I could have sworn that was a huge hit here stateside. I mean, Hot 100, sure, but didn't even crack the top 40. However, it did go number 1 in the UK. Now, here's what's so interesting, and this is where watching these different videos about the band from all of their perspectives as far as songwriting. And I think that's maybe why some of my musician friends kind of have this ambivalence to them as well, is that because they are so cerebral about it, it seems like it's less passionate and more that it is crafting a song. But I think that's what songwriting is, song crafting. It's putting together these different elements. And they took it very, very seriously as far as how do you put together a song, and really thought very hard about instrumentation and where things happen in a song. And when you push, when you pull, loud to soft, working on all the different dynamics. I found it interesting in hearing their creation process. But anyway, Message in the Bottle, 74 in the States, number 1 in the UK. Fallout didn't do anything except for the UK. Walking on the Moon also was not a hit here in the States. Didn't even chart, but went number 1 in the UK. Bring on the Night. Then they did a reissue of So Lonely, which is on Outlandish d'Amour, which then hit a bunch of charts. And then their last single off of Regatta de Blanc was The Bed's Too Big Without You. No chart placement anywhere. So next, so again, they're just starting to chug out stuff, right? So almost a year to the day, October 3rd, 1980, 1 year later, Zenyatta Mandata was released. Here they're starting to get some bigger traction. Now, mind you, they have platinum records all throughout the Anglo world at this point. And now they're starting to expand because here you have Japanese charts. Like, they are starting to really take on the world at this point. So Zenyatta Mandata went to number 5 here in the States. And again, number 1 in UK, Australia, number 2 in Canada, number 1 in Spain, like really starting to hit their stride. It was actually double platinum here in the States. So let's see. The singles. Oh my gosh, you just look at this track listing. Now, this is where I do remember them because this is early MTV, right? Don't Stand So Close to Me. I remember that video when it debuted. And now MTV new, brand new. I don't know which VJ that was supposed to be. It certainly wasn't Martha Quinn. Maybe it was, no, that wasn't Mark Goodman. No. Anyway, Don't Stand So Close to Me. Driven to Tears. When the World is Running Down, You Make the Best of What's Still Around. Canary in a Coal Mine. Voices Inside My Head. Bombs Away. De-do-do-do. De-da-da-da. Behind My Camel. Man in a Suitcase. Shadows in the Rain. The Other Way of Stopping. Chart positions. Let's see here. So they released 2 singles. Interesting, because they were just massive. Maybe that's all you need. You need 2 huge singles, I guess, and then you can just tour the world. So Don't Stand So Close to Me was their first top 10 here in the United States, and I think their third in the UK. Pretty much charted everywhere. Yeah, Don't Stand So Close to Me charted everywhere, went number 1 in Ireland. And then interestingly enough, De Da Da was also a top 10 hit here in the States. Only went to number 5 here in the US, in the UK. Man, and those both were gold singles. But those videos had some humor to them. I mean, Don't Stand So Close to Me was pretty dark content, the video itself, but then they had these like little breaks of, I guess, comedic elements, unless I'm forgetting the whole video. And De Da Da was just all silly and fun. And I think there's something to be said for that too, that they didn't always take themselves so seriously. You know what I mean? It's really just, why not? Just have some fun. So next, I think this is the longest they went. No, up until that point, right? So it wasn't until, this is another year. Holy cow. 78, 79, 80, and now 1981, October 2nd. So again, October 2nd, October 3rd, and now October 2nd, 1981, with Ghost in the Machine, now their highest placed record in the U.S., reaching number 2 on the charts, ones in multiple other countries, triple platinum here in the United States. So Ghost in the Machine, again, you look through the Spirits in the Material World. Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, which is probably my favorite Police song. And one, even in the midst of all what I said earlier about not being really into them, when I proposed to my wife, I did make a mix CD for the night because I made her dinner. It was like a whole thing. And this is one of the songs that was on there. Invisible Sun, Hungry for You, Demolition Man, Too Much Information, Rehumanize Yourself, One World Not Three, Omega Man, Secret Journey, and Darkness. Those are some pretty damn good singles. I mean, truly. Now this says, really? So their first single was Invisible Sun. That seems an odd choice because every Little Thing She Does Is Magic was their next release. I remember that right away. That was number 3 here in the United States, number 1 in a bunch of other countries. I mean, they have a ton of top hits in the UK. Went platinum in the UK. But I could have sworn that Spirits in the Material World was the first single. That's the first one I remember from this album, I guess. I could have sworn that was first. That was a top 11 on the charts here in the States and number 12 in the UK. Highest chart placement was in the Netherlands with number 8. No, I'm sorry, number 6 in Ireland. What a moody song. And we'll go back and we'll go through the songs a little bit. But what an odd song. I remember feeling like it was kind of creepy. It just has that vibe. And then they released Secret Journey. That went to top, number 46 here in the States. I don't really remember that one, but I'm sure as soon as I turn it on, I would recognize it. So now, this is crazy, okay? The longest break in between. So here we have from 2 years later, June 17th, 1983, their swan song, which is crazy to think about it. A release a year, then a 2-year break, and they release Synchronicity. And this was massive. Number 1 pretty much everywhere. Number 1 album pretty much everywhere. 8 times platinum here in the United States. It won every award. Let's see. It was nominated for a total of 5 awards, including Album of the Year. It won 3. The time of its release and following the Synchronicity tour, the Police popularity was such a high, they were arguably, according to the BBC and The Guardian, the biggest band in the world. I mean, crazy. Huge. Starts off with Synchronicity 1. Walking in Your Footsteps. Oh My God. Mother. Miss Gradenko. Synchronicity 2, Every Breath You Take, King of Pain, Wrapped Around Your Finger, Tea in the Sahara, and Murder by Numbers, which is a bonus track, which is arguably better than Miss Gradenko. But anyway, just that side, the last song of side one. So I come from the era of two sides, as many of you do, right? Synchronicity 2, Every Breath You Take. Synchronicity 2, you then flip. Every Breath You Take, King of Pain, Wrapped Around Your Finger. I mean, crazy good. And I'll be honest, I know I said Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic is my favorite song. It might be Synchronicity 2, just because just that opening riff into the first verse, there's that change. Oh my gosh, that change in tempo. Oh man, it is gorgeous. And it's so high energy, and then it just goes to these different places. I love that song. Synchronicity 2. Yep, that's it. That's my favorite. That's my favorite Police song. It's got to be. It's crazy good. But let's see. How'd they do the singles? So they opened up first single of Every Breath You Take. So this is what's also crazy. This was their only number one single here in the United States. Went gold for Every Breath You Take. This is the song I was meaning earlier when I said a stalker song. Every Breath You Take is not a sweet song. And everyone thinks it's kind of a sweet song, but it's actually quite a dark song. So this is from Sting's own words. I woke up in the middle of the night with that line in my head, sat down at the piano and had written it in half an hour. The tune itself is generic, an aggregate of hundreds of others, but the words are interesting. It sounds like a comforting love song. I didn't realize at the time how sinister it is. I think I was thinking of Big Brother, surveillance, and control. I think the song is very, very sinister and ugly, and people have misinterpreted it as being a gentle little love song, and it is quite the opposite. Yeah, dude, it's a creepy-ass song. And I think that's sometimes where great art comes from. And maybe I didn't give enough credit for the artistry that went into this song that does ostensibly feel like a ballad, but is very sinister. It's a great word. Sinister is a great word for that song. And I will say that when I'm noodling on the bass, that is one of the songs I do like to play on bass. So I do have these little Police moments that pop up in my life at different points. And that's certainly one of them. But yeah, dirty little song. Wrapped Around Your Finger. Again, a completely different vibe. I guess this is what I've really started to appreciate, is that their songs are so different. There is a true diversity to their overall soundscape that still sounds like the Police from song to song, if for no other reason that you think about Sting's voice, Stewart Copeland's drum sound. But yeah, I mean, even Andy Summers, his chord phrasings. Again, I'm not some great musician or anything, but there is something so unique about what they do song to song, yet still very much of the band. Again, I would have put, so Wrapped Around Your Finger came out next. That came out number 8. I could have sworn that Synchronicity 2 was the opening single, because that video was also crazy, high energy. And I can see why maybe I don't know. I figured the record label would have been like, let's come out with this because it's a rock song, right? I don't know. Maybe coming out with Every Breath You Take was the right choice. I think it probably would have reached 1 no matter which order that it was released. But I do understand that there's always a method to marketing madness, and that includes which songs are positioned when in the life cycle of an album. And then finally, King of Pain was the last single, and that went to number 3 here in the States. Did not do as well in other countries. It also went 1 in, went number 1 in Canada. Interesting to me, of all those songs that charted the highest in the States, how they sometimes differed from songs that charted in other countries. But yeah, that went number 3. King of Pain is also, I don't know, there's something I really like about that vocal. Yeah. I always liked that song. I remember when the video came out, I remember being at my grandmother's house. And again, it seems kind of like a dark lyric, but it's just like Sting in the room with all the candles. And I don't know. It's also been I guess I really like the Synchronicity record is what it comes down to. And I've never owned a copy. And I'm trying to remember whose copy I either borrowed or had, but I had it in my hand somewhere. I couldn't place whether it was the album or whether it was the cassette. But yeah, anyway, it's a crazy good record with some of the songs that I think I really enjoy. And I think they all worked harder on this record than they did the others, which is why there was such a gap in between, because it was, I think, more difficult for them at this point because there were so many different elements to the band. So they did this huge Synchronicity tour, had their biggest record release, and then said, we're done. Yeah, we're good. We're going to go on our way, which is crazy. So sometimes people will go, well, wait a minute. Didn't they have a release in 1986? So they did. So they did a kind of compilation, which is Every Breath You Take, the singles, which they did some re-recordings of some of their songs, which was something that Sting wanted to do to kind of showcase where they were musically and that they were better musicians at the time than they were just a few years ago, and kind of show off their chops and their own updated versions of their songs. I don't think I particularly cared for their reissue of Don't Stand So Close to Me. I found it was kind of meh. But yeah, they were technically done. They were done. And they remained done until 2007. 2007, they decided that they were going to do a reunion tour. So I will tell you that one of the things that I ended up watching over the past few days was a documentary that they had done. Interesting enough, that was directed by Stewart Copeland's son, Jordan. He became their tour documentarian. And at its conclusion, back in 2007, 2008, they were marking their 30th year as a band, or when they first formed, right? So 1977 to 2007. At its conclusion, it became the third, now 19th, adjusted inflation or whatever, highest grossing tour of all time, with revenues reaching over $360 million. The tour began in May 2007 and ended. This is how they ended. Madison Square Garden. That was their final show. That's freaking amazing. But the coolest thing is how they started. So they were deciding they were going to do this tour. And their publicist was like, okay, so now we got to do a press conference, blah, blah, blah. And like, could we do something cooler than a press conference? So they decided to make it a concert, a little concert at the Whiskey A Go Go, which is one of the first places they performed in the United States way back when. And they just did a little show in a little room and just got in there and did it. And that's where they actually announced that they were going to be on tour, basically for a year. But watching the documentary, it's interesting to see how, while the Vancouver concerts received overwhelmingly positive reviews from critics, drummer Stewart Copeland, in a forum posted on his official site, called the band's 29th of May performance lame and took humorous pokes at himself and his bandmates. He called one of Sting's song-ending leaps that of a petulant pansy instead of god of rock, joked the band botched the key changes so thoroughly they end up playing avant-garde 12-tone hodgepodges of every little thing she does is magic and Don't Stand So Close to Me, suggested that guitarist Annie Summers was in Idaho when he and Sting ended up half a bar out of sync with each other during opener Message in a Bottle, and claimed he made a hash out of a fill he had worked out for Walking in Your Footsteps by playing it the wrong part of the wrong song. In spite of these glitches, however, he said he was enjoying himself, and after the set, he and his bandmates fell into each other's arms backstage, laughing. It was sincere criticism, and if you read the piece in context, it wasn't that vitriolic. It was an acknowledgement that we are only human, and we are struggling to make it work, playing as if our lives depended on it, and we still had to get it right. When Sting and Andy first read it, they were like, ow, but then they got over it. So I would suggest watching the documentary. It's like an hour long, but it really kind of gets into their dynamic and how it does somewhat seem on occasion to be combative or mean-spirited, but you can see that they're just like bros who know how to push each other's buttons, and it's not mean-spirited. It's just, as I read one reviewer put it, Stewart Copeland is overdramatic. Sting is somewhat petulant, and Andy Summers is just kind of passive aggressive about the whole thing. Just kind of an interesting observation of the three of them. But they all agree that the three of them as a group on stage performing, even in rehearsals, are a force to be reckoned with. So here's another kind of thing that I kind of gleaned from all this. So if any of you watch music-related content, you'll know that there's a guy by the name of Rick Beato who has a series on YouTube. Now, he was fortunate enough to land all three members of the Police separately for their own interviews. And this is one of the things I've watched over the past couple of weeks. And he had Sting on, and Sting is known to be a difficult interview. Now, some would say that an interview, it's somewhat the responsibility of the interviewer to get the information from the person they're interviewing. And if they're known to be difficult, you may be going in there with a certain, I don't want to say you're intimidated, but you could be. I mean, he's fucking Sting, right? And Rick Beato went in and he immediately starts kind of talking music theory and going through chords and all that kind of stuff. And Sting's happy to talk about chords, but he basically said something to the effect, and, you know, he had his fingers up to his lips on his jaw, kind of a reserved kind of, a lot of the body language is very closed off. And he's like, you know, I don't really do the theory thing. And Rick Beato just pivoted at this point and kind of took it a different direction. And next thing you know, many are calling this the best Sting has ever been in an interview. And very open, very welcome. And what's so curious is I had this vision of him being this kind of arrogant, pretentious ass. And even the other members of the band, Stewart Copeland and Andy Summers, like, you have to understand that Sting actually is very humble, and he thinks he is just a speck in this massive universe, even more so than we do. We both think we're small in like the grand context of things, but Sting's all into meditation and all that kind of stuff. And he actually thinks he's quite insignificant. He just takes what he does very seriously. And sometimes that can come off as though he's serious about himself, but he's actually serious about the work. I highly recommend all three of their interviews, but Sting's in particular was so good because it gave me a completely different look at him as a person and his true love for music, affection for his bandmates, both in his solo band and with the Police, and very knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable. But he'll also tell you that, like, he's not a conservatory trained type musician, although he considers himself to be a trained musician, but forged through working the clubs and all those kind of things. So the rest of the band, so, I mean, obviously Sting goes on to this massive solo career, right? We all know that, but honestly, his records have never sold the kind of way that, like, Synchronicity did. Only a couple of, you know, multi-platinum records for the most part. So not this, he's Sting, but still not this like massive solo artist, even though he is. I think his tours have always done very, very well. But like a guy like Andy Summers, just recording, touring, composing, you know, film scoring, those kind of things, doing guitar-based, you know, work. He had announced he had formed Call the Police, a police tribute band with two Brazilian musicians on bass and vocals, and João Barone on drums. Interesting. So he's doing his own version of the Police. I mean, why not? He's 81 years old, the oldest member of the band, but he just kind of went and just did whatever makes him happy as a recording artist and a performer. So good for him. Whereas Stewart Copeland became well known for doing musical scores before turning to opera, of all things. Did you know that Stewart Copeland also did the musical score for Spyro the Dragon, the video game? That is a crazy thing to have kind of on your resume. Very cool. But also, I think somewhat unexpected. It's very interesting. But yeah, they've all done various different things and worked with all different types of people. Stewart Copeland's worked with Primus, Andy Summers, Jeff Lynne, Snoop Dogg, and others in his home studio. He was on Storage Wars. oh my gosh, such a random thing. He also did a opera version of The Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe. Anyway, I could probably keep going and digging in, but I guess what it comes down to is they're a band that now that I'm 50 years old, I'm like, I think I got to just listen to all of their records. I did attempt to listen to something. It might have been Outlandos d'Amour, and it didn't grab me. I bet if I just listened to Synchronicity straight through, I would be totally into it. But they're a complex band. They really are, both as people and as a group. I don't know. It's weird to, I don't know. They're different. They're truly different. And I tend to like quirky bands. I don't know. I guess it's been the Sting thing. I really do. I think it's just been this kind of hang up about Mr., tantric lover and like just all these things that we kind of think about or at least have been revealed to us about who this man is. And maybe it's a unfair kind of viewpoint. Because like I said, these couple of interviews and the documentary on the reunion tour gave me a completely different appreciation of all the members of the band. I mean, conceivably, you could say that Stewart Copeland is kind of the jackass. He is the court jester, but also the antagonist, the one who tends to want to push all the buttons. Admittedly, Andy Summers is just kind of in the middle between these two kind of polarizing figures. But you can also see this true affection between them, this true brotherhood and understanding that the three of them together are the Police. They are this thing that basically conquered the world, made it all the way to the top, and ended at the top. And think about the number of bands who just keep going well past their prime. Hell, they were literally in their prime. They had consistently gotten better and better and better at their craft, at their songwriting, but also in their impact and presence on the global scale. One of those really, truly building block kind of growth patterns that you would want for a band. Some bands come out, they get really lucky right out of the gate and say, well, they were platinum on their debut record. You're right, they were. But how many bands come out with some massive record and then have nowhere to go but down? But they instead, their biggest seller, their hugest album, their hugest tour, reach that apex and step away from the game. That's really impressive. And given their age now, there's virtually no possibility that they're going to reunite. So even reuniting when they did in 2007, 2008, and now I'm looking back, kicking myself because I wasn't this huge fan of them. I was like, because they did a show at Fenway Park. My boss at the time was just out of her mind. Like for her, it was the Police and Billy Idol. Like that was her life as a young person, right? All throughout high school and college, like that was her thing. And she went and she was right on the ground, like 10 rows deep, whatever it was. But I couldn't think of spending the money to go see this band that I'd know all the hits, but I wasn't really into them. Now looking back, they did it perfectly. I mean, they really did. Go out on top, do a big reunion tour, have it become one of the biggest tours ever, and then step right away again. 1 year. 1 year. That's it. 1 year reunion. 2007, 2008. Tour the world. Never created any new music. Said they had no desire to go through that push and pull again. Because that's where they would get contentious. In the studio and the creation of the music. Which obviously many bands have talked about. It's that creative tension that actually leads to the great music. But they really didn't wish to do that because their relationship between each other as people, as men, now in their middle age versus men in their 20s and 30s, it was a dynamic they didn't wish to upset. They were going to have enough of a challenge kind of reining in these different arrangements because now they also had done so much from when they broke up to where they were in 2007 that they were different musicians in many ways and trying to coalesce that all together into the different arrangements. And sometimes having to use different time signatures or using even different tunings for vocals, etc. I mean, Sting was in fine voice in 2007 because they obviously played some of the concert clips, and I've watched some of their Union concerts. I've been doing a lot of Police watching. What can I say? It's also something that I did, almost all of yesterday when I was recovering from surgery, was just watching videos. But an interesting band, one that I never got into, and I guess I'm kind of into them at the moment. And I just have to look at that as being, this is the rabbit hole that I'm going down. And I thought I'd share it with all of you. So I'd love to know your opinions on the Police. Were you someone who was just all about them, and this was like your favorite band in your teens? Or is it something that you discovered later? Maybe you felt like I do. They weren't really my jam at the time, but I've maybe come to appreciate them. Or you just completely written them off, and maybe now you go, okay, maybe I'll go give them a shot. Well, let me know your thoughts. And how can you do that? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.